Man, it's quiet in here. The term reverence comes to mind, I'll tell you. So we'll get started here in just a minute. So. Committee will come to order. I want to thank everyone for being here this morning. This committee has made cybersecurity a top priority in recent years, and with good reason. It's become one of the most serious challenges for small businesses and major corporations and the federal government itself. We have heard from cybersecurity experts, government officials, and small business owners on numerous occasions, and the message is clear. Cyber threats remain a top concern for America's small business community. Advances in information technology, or IT, have helped small businesses rapidly increase their productivity, enter new markets that were once out of reach, and offer consumers new and innovative services and products. However, IT has advanced so quickly that it has been difficult to keep pace with the ever-growing cyber threats. Cyber criminals and foreign bad actors have more opportunities than ever to steal intellectual property, consumer data, and hold small business IT systems hostage for financial gain. In 2016 alone, the United States Department of Justice recorded nearly 300,000 cybersecurity complaints. Our committee's examinations of these increasing concerns have revealed that federal agencies are making a serious effort to better coordinate and distribute cybersecurity resources directly to small businesses. However, there are still challenges to ensuring that small businesses are as protected as possible from cyber attacks. One of the major hurdles continues to be the lack of information sharing between public and private sectors. Information sharing is a fundamental component for a strong and effective cybersecurity defense, not just for small businesses, but for America's network as a whole. The federal government must make every effort possible to ensure that small businesses have both the resources and the confidence they need to actively engage with the federal agencies tasked with protecting our critical infrastructure. Today, we will hear from several members of the small business community about what steps we can take to encourage greater information sharing. We will examine how federal agencies can provide assistance and resources more quickly to small businesses suffering from a cyber attack. Earlier this year, we learned that the federal government has become increasingly active in protecting our nation's critical infrastructure and IT systems and has gone to great lengths to develop an overall framework for cybersecurity protocols to incentivize information sharing practices with businesses. However, it has also become abundantly clear that the development of this framework is not enough. Last Congress, the President signed into law legislation aimed at increasing information sharing practices through the Cybersecurity of Information Sharing Act, CISA. This legislation provided some important liability protections to small businesses to give them trust and confidence in their federal partners. Yet many businesses continue to be slow to adopt these practices. That's why this committee has been working on legislation to provide small businesses with greater assistance in their cybersecurity needs. In July, my colleague Representative Dwight Evans and I introduced H.R. 3170, the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act of 2017. Perhaps the longest name for a bill in congressional history. This bill will direct SBDCs to establish a program for certifying some of their employees to provide cybersecurity planning assistance to small businesses. It's my hope that through this program, we will be able to encourage even more small businesses to start partaking in information sharing activities and create a comprehensive cybersecurity defense for all Americans. I would now like to yield to the ranking member for the purpose of her making her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The frequent recurrence of cyber attacks remind us just how fundamental it is for individuals, businesses, and governments to guard against unwanted foreign interception. From hackers orchestrating the Equifax breach to Russia's attack on our democratic institutions, cybersecurity merits our attention more than ever before. The truth is, online commerce has facilitated business opportunities and growth for mom and pop shops across America, but few small businesses make investment in security solutions to protect the data they hold. Many entrepreneurs don't even view themselves as targets. Criminals, on the other hand, view them as particularly attractive. The combination of customer data and the lax implementation of cybersecurity make them much more appealing to cyber criminals. While it is widely known that cyber attacks often result in personal and business losses, small firms often do not recognize their exposure until it is too late. Given that small firms make up over 99% of businesses, the small business community plays a critical role in ensuring the nation's internet infrastructure is secure and preventing the harsh financial consequences that cyber intrusions have is critical for their survival. Because criminals will continuously seek to profit by stealing data from both the government and the private sector, cyber incidents are not diminishing in the near future. That is why we all must take the appropriate steps to strengthen cybersecurity. For nearly 2 decades, the federal government has actively created a policy framework that seeks to prevent cyber attacks by incentivizing data sharing and collaboration between federal and private actors. Doing so is just one step to enhance readiness against external threats. Encouraging businesses to share information regarding cyber intrusions could help federal agencies design solutions before problems occur. If the private sector and the government collaborate to identify vulnerabilities, both small businesses and the government will be better prepared. Mr. Chairman, over the last year, we have seen cyber criminals prey on one of the largest credit rating agencies. We have witnessed hackers publicly releasing tools stolen from the National Security Agency. And most disturbing, as we all know, our democratic institutions were remarkably vulnerable to Russia's cyber meddling, potentially impacting the outcome of our elections. These events make clear cybersecurity issues will become more prominent every day in all aspects of our society. In that regard, I look forward to learning how we can better maximize the flow of information between small businesses and the federal government to help improve the resiliency of our cyber infrastructure. Thank you all for being here today and offering your insights. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Young lady yields back. And if committee members have opening statements prepared, we ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'd now like to take just a moment to explain our lighting system and rules. You get 5 minutes, basically. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on to let you know you have a minute to wrap up. And then the red light will come on and let you know you're supposed to stop. We'll give you a little bit of leeway there, but don't take advantage of it. I would now like to introduce our very distinguished panel here this morning. Our first witness is Rob Arnold. Mr. Arnold has worked in Internet security for over 20 years and is the founder and chief executive officer of ThreatSketch, LLC. ThreatSketch provides risk management tools and education to small businesses to help them prevent cyber attacks. So we appreciate you being here with us today. Our second witness is Ms. Ola Sage. Ms. Sage is the CEO of eManagement in Silver Spring, Maryland, where she oversees eManagement's information technology and cybersecurity services. In addition to her role as CEO, Ms. Sage chairs the executive committee of the National IT Sector Coordinating Council and serves on the board of the George Mason University Women in Business Initiative, and we welcome you here as well this morning. Our third witness will be Mr. Morgan Reed. Mr. Reed serves as the president of the App Association. The App Association represents more than 5,000 app companies and information technology firms in the mobile economy. Mr. Reed has previously appeared before the Small Business Committee last year, and we welcome him back here today. And I would now like to yield to the ranking member for the introduction of our fourth witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tom Gann, the Chief Public Policy Officer for McAfee, a computer security software company. Mr. Gann has over 20 years of experience in the technology industry, 12 of which had been focused on cybersecurity issues. Mr. Gann holds a bachelor's degree from the Stanford University in Political Science and a master's degree from the London Business School. Welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnold, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank the chair, ranking member, and the entire committee for the opportunity to testify today. It's truly an honor. My company, ThreatSketch, makes extensive use of shared information to educate small businesses and guide their investments in cybersecurity. We're a small business ourselves, thus I truly understand the needs and challenges around sharing cybersecurity information. The most fundamental problem in accessing data right now is fragmentation. The DHS, FBI, NIST, and the NSA are just a few of the agencies collecting cyber information. Each has multiple repositories and programs. Some are well advertised, while some are part of work groups and not widely available. Others are hidden by classification. Simply having a list of all the data sharing initiatives available would help us tremendously. Another problem with sharing information is the overuse of classification. There's a myriad of rules governing the declassification of information, but declaring valuable information a secret is almost effortless. It takes no more than 2 words, uttered with a grave tone, to play keep away with vital information. That's classified. And just like that, our cyber equivalents of neighborhood crime statistics and sex offender registries are taken away in the name of national security. While secrets definitely have their place, we have a right to know what's going on around us, and every data point that gets classified degrades our ability to make good decisions. But there's a more pressing issue which I need to draw your attention to, and it is the byproduct of 2 distinct disadvantages that small businesses face. First, as these larger companies armor up, attackers are turning to less protected small businesses. Number 2, small businesses cannot afford to compete with big companies for the cybersecurity talent and solutions they need to protect themselves. These are circular issues, with one begetting the other. In their wake, the demand for affordable solutions will rise dramatically, creating yet another threat. Small businesses desperate to meet the cybersecurity demands of larger clients, government regulations, insurance carriers, and lending institutions are going to become victims once again. Adversaries will use this opportunity to sell cheap software and services that are subsidized by selling data and secrets out the back door, while giving them a toehold into the supply chain of larger organizations. My written testimony offers one possible solution, which is to deputize small businesses that commit to providing services that are all American in origin. In addition to tapping our SBDCs, I believe the government has two resources that can help with the collection and dissemination of cybersecurity information. Our Bureau of Labor Statistics is very good at aggregating, summarizing, and making data available in easy-to-digest forms. Meanwhile, the IRS is the one agency to which every small business owner is happy to report some losses. In summary, small businesses need local solutions that can tap into a national network of trusted solution providers. The SBDCs have proven effective in helping small businesses navigate a myriad of state, federal, and local resources, and with training, I think they can rise to this challenge as well. Thank you for allowing me to testify before you today. I look forward to answering your questions after we hear from my fellow witnesses.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Sage, am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it?
You are, Chairman. Thank
Okay,
you.
Very good. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Shabbat, Ranking Member Velasquez, and the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today as the small business CEO. In the last 12 months, 61% of small businesses have reported that their companies have experienced a cyber attack, and a stunning 71% of small businesses are not prepared to address cybersecurity threats to their organizations. Solving this problem requires greater information sharing between the federal government and the small business community to help our companies better identify threats, protect our infrastructure, detect anomalies, respond to, and recover from significant cyber events. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, which I'll refer to as CISA, can help, but small businesses don't know about it. While significant progress has been made in implementing the law in general, several challenges still persist for small businesses. First, small businesses are still unaware of CISA or how it helps them. The government has the opportunity to increase the visibility of the law through its existing outreach and awareness programs to the small business community, and to highlight the law's protections, particularly in the area of liability protections. Small businesses are still confused by the myriad of information sharing initiatives. A small business guide for cybersecurity information sharing would be a useful tool to help companies better understand the value these various public and private information sharing options provide. Third, cybersecurity information can be costly. While data provided by the government may be free, many small businesses do not have adequate resources to make the best use of this data. And for some, signing up with a commercial information sharing organization may be the best option. However, many of the options available today cost thousands of dollars per year, putting them out of reach for many. Let me now turn to some ideas for incentives that Congress might consider to encourage greater information sharing and cyber threat reporting between small businesses and the federal government. First, expand CISA to add additional protections for small businesses. CISA does not currently shield companies from potential liability in the event of a data breach or cyber attack. Congress might consider providing a positive incentive by extending liability protection up to a maximum threshold to small businesses that exhibit a measurable commitment to voluntary information sharing. This could be through demonstrated use of the NIST cybersecurity framework, voluntary participation in one or more public or private information sharing forums, and maintaining active cybersecurity insurance. Second, introduce tax incentives. Congress might consider introducing incentives that could include deductions and credits for cybersecurity and information sharing related capital investments and personnel, among others. Third, include participation in a public or private information sharing program as a selection criteria for government procurements. The government has and continues to use preferential consideration in the procurement process to promote or influence desired behavior. These include considerations for minority groups, quality and process improvement standards, and research priorities. The GSA Alliance Small Business Government-Wide Acquisition Contract provides one example for quality standards. 4, recognize small businesses that commit to cybersecurity information sharing. Voluntary programs such as Energy Star, which is a joint program of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy, can serve as a blueprint to design a public recognition program for small businesses participating in voluntary information sharing programs. Lastly, simplify the entry point for cyber threat reporting for small businesses. Most small businesses either don't know who to call or are overwhelmed by the choices and therefore won't bother reporting. Last year, the Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council, or CPAC, formed a working group with the DHS, Office of Infrastructure Protection, to investigate how to get a national tip line started that would serve as a single point of contact for reporting emergency cybersecurity information. Using this example, one could envision a scenario where a small business calls a national emergency response number and, based on information provided, is immediately connected to the appropriate resource or resources. In conclusion, CISA is still early in its life cycle, but I believe holds tremendous promise for the small business community as more companies become aware of the law and how it can help them. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reed, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and distinguished members of the committee, my name is Morgan Reed, and I am the president of ACT, the App Association. I thank you for holding this important hearing. I represent more than 5,000 companies who make the apps you love and the devices you depend on. We are the driving force behind a nearly $150 billion industry, and we continue to grow and create American jobs in every congressional district. And our members are building the tools that underpin this jump from the desktop world to our new world of mobile plus cloud. But for small businesses trying to create new products and sales opportunities, cybersecurity threats seem incomprehensibly vast and inevitable. In 2014, 71% of companies admitted they fell victim to a cyber attack. Moreover, the amount of data online is expected to increase 50-fold by 2020, adding new attack vectors and, frankly, sweetening the pot for potential cyber criminals. And we haven't even mentioned the new world of IoT and self-driving everything that's right around the corner. At the App Association, we sit at the crossroads of this topic. We have dozens of members who are key players in cybersecurity, like Fish Labs, Alchemy Studios, and Cetera, and on the front lines of anti-phishing, anti-botnet, and DDoS attacks. But we also have members who build all the amazing apps you use every day, that you rely on to do your banking, to monitor your child's homework, buy a house, and communicate with your doctor. With a foot firmly in both sides of the industry, we know policymakers must remain mindful of the fact that large companies have budgets and staff available. For our members, Chief Security Officer may be just one of 5 hats that they wear. Small and medium-sized tech companies like our members exist to solve problems. Take Canned Spinach, for example. It's a company in your district, Mr. Chabot. Canned Spinach, led by Andrew Savitz, built a product called Speakeasy. It allows for people inside of a company to distribute coupons and secret deals that their family members might want. The problem he ran into is, based on phishing attacks and other cybersecurity attacks, users were unsure where they were getting this from, who provided it, and so he had to essentially design the product from the ground up to deal with the cybersecurity threats so that people could get good deals from their friends inside of companies. And our clicks and mortar businesses have this problem as well. For Chairwoman Velasquez, she knows Etsy quite well, headquartered in her district. They have requirements for strong data security methods to handle the consumer data on their platform. And I should point out that Mr. Bratt and Mr. Schneider, you both have health companies in your district that deal with thousands of patient records. For you, Mr. Kelly, there's a company in your district that does home restorations. They go into a house, take pictures of the damage, but think about what they now know about that person. They know their address, they have photos of their valuables, and it's all stored on their cloud service. It's a great product, but what do they do about cybersecurity? And so when you think of it from their perspective of problem solving, and then thinking about it on how do they enter this space, you can see how government information sharing is really not meeting the challenge that we have today. The first thing that we do in private sector is we rely on our private sector platform partners. We use products like Microsoft Cloud Services and Azure for cloud, Apple Health Kit for health, the latest Intel Sawtooth chip for making blockchain more practical and efficient. But that symbiotic relationship only takes us so far. We need Congress to do some major changes to how we do info sharing. First, we need to improve the sharing activities. The federal government should make the cybersecurity threat information it shares timely, more accessible, and frankly, more useful to SMEs. When a business is hit with a cyber attack, with whom do they share it? Do they call the attack while the attack is occurring, as opposed to after the fact? Do they call somebody at NKIC? Do they even know what NKIC is? Somebody at their local fusion center or their ISAC? And where are these entities located? And how do companies share the information with them? Second, the federal government should take steps to make cybersecurity frameworks and best practices more workable for SMEs. Helping SMEs to improve their understanding, whether it's through lunch and learns at SBDCs or other activities, we need to see developed, widely published, targeted, and user-friendly best practices and guidance built on the NIST framework. And third, the federal government needs to ensure a legal and policy environment that enhances SMEs' ability to manage the dynamic cybersecurity risks. And this part falls squarely on Congress. Congress must make steps to provide legal and policy certainty that SMEs can rely on. Specifically, Congress should pass the International Communications Privacy Act, known as ICPA, for this year's Congress, it's H.R. 3718, to clarify SMEs' legal liability in data requests, especially with data abroad. And they need to maintain this legal environment to help support our investment in cybersecurity. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Chairman Shabbat and Ranking Member Velasquez for co-sponsorship of this legislation in the last Congress, and I ask all of you to join with them in support for it in the 2015. Thank you very much, and I look forward to an engaging conversation on this topic.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Mr. Gann, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Tom Gann, the Chief Public Policy Officer for McAfee. McAfee is one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. Indeed, we take great pride in protecting consumers and businesses and organizations of all sizes. As the committee has ably pointed out in the past, small businesses face many of the same cybersecurity risks as large ones. Some cyber attack methods, such as malware and those that begin with spear phishing, are particularly well suited for small businesses, who might be an easy target because of their lack of cybersecurity resources. Small businesses store information, implement operational requirements, and own valuable intellectual property just as large enterprises do, so they need to have strong cybersecurity protections. Investing in more than just very basic cybersecurity tools requires time, money, and other resources, like an IT staff, that too often small businesses just don't have. We have to acknowledge the fact that for most small businesses, cybersecurity is an expense that they don't want to incur when they're simply trying to make payroll and be profitable. So what's the solution? Should small businesses participate in DHS's Cyber Threat Information Sharing Program that was mandated by CISA? This is a question worth exploring. In talking with our customers, it's clear that many small businesses are unaware of CISA. They often don't understand how the law can help them, and they're confused by the many information sharing initiatives that are out there. However, I do believe we should consider how information sharing efforts, such as those mandated by CISA, can benefit businesses of all sizes. The DHS initiative, known as the Automated Indicator Sharing Program, is open to small businesses, but many small businesses don't have the resources or an educated IT staff to make use of it or benefit from it. Any information sharing capabilities require time, money, and people that small businesses sometimes are stretched to staff. This doesn't mean that small businesses don't need or can't benefit from cyber threat intelligence. They certainly can, but perhaps we should focus our discussion more on information sharing of a different kind, information that is informative and educational right off the bat. According to the Better Business Bureau, when asked to judge 10 cyber statements as to being true or false, the average small business owner's score was around 60%. This means that for many small business owners, there's really a lack of understanding of the cyber challenge at all. The federal government should help develop and fund the stand-up of a nonprofit information sharing and analysis organization for small businesses. Such an entity could provide education, such as basic cyber hygiene and more advanced topics like incorporating the NIST cybersecurity framework into members' programs. It could share best practices, lessons learned, templates, and processes for addressing threats and assistance understanding problems. Additionally, this organization could serve as a hub in the event of a breach and the first point of contact in determining whether or not to reach out to law enforcement. It could assist the business in addressing the incident and communicate the situation to other members. Further, we recommend outsourcing IT to a cloud provider that would be responsible for security. That's a real advantage for small businesses. The cloud provider would benefit from an ever-growing network effect of more and more threat data, improving the very cybersecurity capabilities and protections they deliver to their customers, small businesses. Both infrastructure as a service and security as a service can be economical ways to provide efficiencies and security so that small businesses really can benefit from an ecosystem of information sharing that it's bidirectional with the government and the private sector. Small business owners, however, cannot contract all of their security obligations out, particularly in the area of strong blocking and tackling, making sure that passwords are updated and information is backed up on a regular basis. Small businesses would also benefit from more cyber insurance. The government could act as a reinsurer for the cybersecurity market that really, in many cases, is in early stages. Indeed, the idea of providing tax benefits and credits to small businesses so they can purchase cyber insurance is a very good idea and would help pump prime what is today still an emerging market. Finally, the government should devote additional resources to fighting cybercrime. Too often, it's our small businesses that are impacted by ransomware attacks, and small businesses need all the help they can get. Investing in additional federal, state, and local crime-fighting capabilities to help take down the bad guys to protect our small businesses, well, those are good investments that should be made. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to testify. It's very kind. We take very seriously our small business customers, and I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their really excellent testimony here. And Mr. Arnold, I'll begin with you. Recognize myself for 5 minutes. You noted that the large number of data sharing initiatives offered by the federal government and non-governmental partnerships can be pretty overwhelming for a small business. Do you believe it would be beneficial if there was a single portal for small businesses to engage federal agencies to begin the information sharing process? And if so, could you identify any particular agency or entity that would be best suited for that task, specifically for handling requests from small businesses?
Sure. So I do think at a base level we need just a simple directory. What information is out there, and for each of these, what kind of information is being consumed by that sharing initiative, what kind are they making available, and what's the membership requirements. And I think that the SBDCs actually are well positioned for that because they already do this with so many other government programs and initiatives. They seem like a logical fit.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Sage, I'll turn to you next. In your testimony, you mentioned that one reason small businesses are reluctant to share cybersecurity information is the perception that shared information gets lost or goes into a black hole, causing companies to worry about the security or uses of their data. Can you please elaborate on that concern, and do you have any suggestions for how information sharing portals could be more transparent in their receipt and use of shared data?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. I think that is the reality for a lot of small businesses that, it's sometimes referred to as the black hole. Information is sent in and not exactly sure. And that certainly hasn't helped with some of the recent compromises that have occurred where information has been, breached and released. So I think that but on the other hand, there have been efforts to really try and address that and stem it. So I was presenting that in the context of cyber information sharing, so that if there are general concerns about information sharing, regardless of whether it's cyber or not, my goal was to really highlight the fact that cyber just adds another element of concern, because that's even more potentially damaging to an organization. And I think that some of these protections that I mentioned in my recommendations can help with that. If companies feel like there are protections for them if their information is breached, and so that they're the victim of this situation and then not necessarily responsible for also addressing it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reed, can you provide any example of how small business data or shared information practices might invite unwanted regulations for small businesses, particularly in the tech industry? What steps can we, policymakers, take to ensure that small businesses' personal information and IT data is protected from regulatory action?
Well, I think one of the key elements to start with for this committee and for Congress in general is our catchphrase at ACT, which is nobody wants technology at the speed of government. And so when you think about where we stand on the regulatory framework, I think you start off the right foot and ask the question of if we increase the methodologies and reporting requirements and the pathways forward for companies and how they have to engage, then we know what will happen. Either we will not innovate new products at all, or the products you see on the shelf will be incredibly limited, or worse, really expensive. And very quickly, to go to an example that Ms. Sage hit, we took a staff deal to South Carolina and we met with a company, Fish Labs. And Fish Labs is one of the leading anti-spearfishing companies out there. And I worry about this talk about regulatory bodies and new agencies. The CEO of Fish Labs in this room full of staff, including DHS, said, by the way, guys, I want to show you something. Clicked over to US CERT. Said the Anti-Phishing Working Group has this email where you send data if you have a phishing attack. I'm a leading phishing expert. I have no idea how to get that data. I've spent months in contact with DHS. They won't provide it. I don't know what's going on, and yet here is this government agency collecting data on phishing. And to Mr. Arnold's point, how is that not something that gets in? So to your question, Mr. Shabbat, I think we see that there's often a gap between the regulatory intention of Congress and how it gets played out. And therefore, I'd look to caution additional regulations that could harm small business.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, Mr. Gann, I ran out of time before I got to you. I had a pretty good question, but my time's expired, and I'll now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member of Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, and again, thank you to the witnesses for joining us today and sharing your insights. Cybersecurity for a small business, it's not a one-time transaction. It's not a decision you make at a point. It's not an action you take just once, like rent or buy. It's not an investment you make one time. It is a business constant, no different than sales, marketing, or finance. And to be effective, I think it has to start with, as you guys have touched on, it starts with design. It includes implementation. It requires ongoing vigilance. And then if something happens, you have event management and ultimately recovery and a response and recovery. For a small business, just the thought of that can be overwhelming. A small business, oftentimes, the founder is going to be the chief marketing officer, the chief finance officer, and the chief bottle washer. That is the problem. Those small businesses are going to look to outside resources. So my question for the panel is, as many small businesses look at the need for cybersecurity, understand it, but that the investment and ongoing maintenance of that is somewhat overwhelming, what resources are available for them? What role, Mr. Gann, does insurance play? I know it's changed since the last time we were here. And how do we make sure that we go from not just information sharing, which is important, but to helping these businesses have solutions?
Well, a couple of big recommendations I think can make a difference. The first one is for most small businesses, their priority first and foremost is to make payroll, grow the business, and hopefully become an even larger, more successful business over time. Toward that end, we recommend outsourcing to IT, data centers, cloud providers. By doing that, it can be cheaper, better, faster. Those large institutions can help with security. That said, small business owners are still responsible for their endpoints. And so getting basic education in place, putting in place basic blocking and tackling of passwords, really important. Those things can add a lot of value rapidly. The last point I'd make, I didn't include it in my testimony, but it is vitally important for all IT organizations that are developing new products to bake security and privacy into their products in the first instance. By doing that, first off, it can reduce the burden on all businesses and really bring forward the benefits of a much easier look and feel to technology that's secure, such that small businesses and all businesses can focus on what they really need to do, and that's growing their businesses and satisfying the needs of their customers.
Mr. Reed?
I think one of the key elements that we learned is we have to divide it between small businesses that are involved in solving cybersecurity problems and small businesses who, as Mr. Gann pointed out, are busy moving a different product. And I think that platforms play a critical role, but I also think, given this committee's jurisdiction, there is more that can be done out of SBA and SBDCs to provide a lunch and learn opportunity. Any small businessman, the number one thing, and having started some business myself, that you run into is that feeling of alone. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure who to turn to. And frankly, as you point out, when these things happen, you're underwater. So you need to have a friendship circle, so to speak, a circle of trust that you can go to. And I think SBDCs can provide some of that, because I think at a certain point, the main thing a small business needs from an incident report, and as you say, baking it in early, is to know who to call, how to react, and how to clean up. And so I think there is more that can be done.
Ms. Sage?
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. I actually agree with Mr. Reed on the point of the different categories of small businesses, because a lot of it depends on what kind of business you are. On a larger, I would actually just say, I think incentives are great motivators for small businesses. Fundamentally, what we care about is, can we get a new customer? Can we keep our existing customers? And can we stay in business? And so whether it's cybersecurity or, potential, lawsuits or, sales and anything that's not going to help us advance one of those three objectives is something that we're less likely to do. And so to the extent that, Congress can provide incentives for us to want to do better in the area of cybersecurity, I think that would help.
Mr. Arnold?
I think that one of the best things that the government can do is simply be as transparent as possible with information, allow it come down to us, and give the small business community an opportunity to wrought solutions for themselves from that raw data. That's a role that both myself and Ola Sage play in this, is taking that data and making it accessible.
Great. Thank you, and my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Radowagan, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Talofa, good morning. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today, and I want to thank you all for testifying. All of you can answer my two brief questions. Do you believe the government's responsibilities and small business owners' responsibilities in protecting businesses are balanced? And as a follow-up, what educational outreach efforts should the federal government be making to inform small business owners about cybersecurity information sharing practices? Mr. Arnold?
Yes. So I think the question of balance, it's very hard to balance the desire to keep information secret in the name of national security, yet also make it available to the people that need it. And I would encourage the government to err on the side of making it available. Unfortunately, security by obscurity does not work. And I think the best policy the government can take is one of transparency. And then with regard to education, I think we need to broaden the topic of cybersecurity to include legal, insurance, and even marketing, because there is a need to reestablish a tarnished image after an attack. And I'll yield to the other witnesses.
Ms. Sage?
Thank you, Ms. Radenwagen. On the question of balance, I think that is something that we're constantly trying to, for lack of a better word, balance. I think to Mr. Arnold's point in the whole area of classification, one of the things we see is, information may be classified when it comes to sources and methods, but the actual issues or concerns are not necessarily classified. The challenge is that perhaps with all of the information overload that we all have, sometimes it's not apparent which of these unclassified areas or topics or issues really need to be paid the most attention to. So I think that's an opportunity for our government partners, as they're putting out this information, even in an unclassified format, to be able to provide some level, I don't know if it's the ranking or scoring, or some level of identification to help companies understand, while everything is bad, but here are the things that we want you to pay particular attention to. When it comes to education awareness, I actually think that several agencies are really doing their best to really get the word out there. It's a big issue. It's a big topic. So whether it's SBA or DHS with their CQ program, NIST, Federal Trade Commission has some really good products. I think this is going to be a whole of government effort. I don't necessarily think that just one agency will be able to address all of the educational awareness needs.
Mr. Reed?
I want to agree with Mr. Arnold and Ms. Sage about the issues about classification. Let me put a fine point on it. You ask about balance. If an agent decides to classify something, what happens to him if he's wrong? Nothing. If a small business doesn't have that information, they go out of business, and worse, their consumers and their customers, and frankly, your constituents, are harmed. And so when you ask the question about balance, I think that we don't have a good balance on it, because ultimately the small business goes away and people are harmed, and the government's impact of making the more cautionary decision is nothing. So I think we have to remember what the impact of not sharing equals. On the education side, I would say that it's important to not undervalue the platforms. Most of us are looking to build some cool, interesting product on top of other technologies. And whether it's a cloud provider or another security company or anyone else in the space, look at ways that you can do public-private partnership with platforms to push that education to their customers. And if it's meaningful for them in an economic sense, it'll be meaningful for us as small businesses.
Mr. Gann?
So on the question of balance in the area of information sharing, the big thing that one needs to remember is that small businesses are part of a much larger information sharing ecosystem, whether they're interacting with a cloud provider, whether they're interacting with an endpoint security provider. Making sure the government is doing a very good job of managing equities in terms of what data to release, what data not to release in the cyber domain is absolutely critical to the health of that entire ecosystem. We always encourage the government to be prudent in what it classifies. If you're at the NSA or one of those organizations, you may be seeing 3 or 5% of the threats that are truly
I'm out of time, Mr. Gann.
that are truly derived from sources and methods. Those need to be held back. The other types of data that are more mundane should be shared.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. This discussion underscores the dilemma small firms have in protecting their companies and their clients' data, while also sharing information not only with each other, but with the federal government. And I want you to know I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. You know. Yeah, yeah. Can the panel please explain what a good balance look like for companies to have adequate protection while also working cooperatively with various agents and authorities to share data?
Thank you for the question. So how do you achieve this balance? I think that again, the erring on the side of transparency first. One of the things I suggested in my written testimony is that maybe we let the frontline responders classify everything and initially, but then have some central clearinghouse like DHS that can go through with the specific objective of declassifying everything to the point where it gets good information out without undermining the needs of the nation state security.
Anyone else care to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Actually, in my testimony, I really kind of focused on the area of liability protection and explicitly asked for your consideration of expanding that liability protection to small businesses in the event of a data breach or attack. Because I think part of the concern, and it kind of speaks to part of my earlier written testimony, where I talked about some of the concerns small businesses have with providing information, particularly negative information to the government, that in some way it can either be lost or misused, et cetera. And so I think that that combination of the worry of providing information that may someday come back to haunt you, and God forbid you actually have an event, I think that would help small businesses to feel more comfortable sharing. Now, in my written testament, I also don't say, well, just give us liability protection. I do say that there has to be some measurable commitment by these small businesses to cyber hygiene and cyber readiness. And so I think it's a formula of both requiring or asking or incentivizing small businesses to share information, but also providing protections in the event that there is a breach.
I think most of everything has been covered, but in thinking about it, I think part of it is also how do people assemble what they view as valuable information. In your district, there's a company that's called Tech for Vets that works with a lot of veterans information. As you can imagine, they do great work for the veterans community, but that also means they have access to an enormous amount of very sensitive data. And so when considering what that balance looks like and how do we engage, we agree with Ms. Sage that I think liability protection is absolutely essential, but it reflects the fact that when you have that data and it's breached, your reaction is going to be, oh my goodness, how do I staunch the bleeding? How do I stop the pain? And oftentimes that your first reaction is not to tell everybody how you're in pain. And so finding a way that removes that liability or creates other frameworks where you can say, I tried my best, I didn't make it, help me next time. And so whether it's through incentives or liability protection, I think you have to understand the emotional state of somebody when they're going through an incident, because I think it helps inform how you do a better job the next time.
So the single best thing that policymakers can do in the area of cybersecurity is continue to keep the issue very bipartisan. If you go back 10, 15 years and move forward from where we've started to where we are today, an awful lot of progress has in fact been made. CISA was passed. We've stood up authorities in the civil government domain, putting DHS in the first chair on cyber. We've increased information sharing. We've broadly educated the population, large business, small business to some degree, on the cyber threats. Keep that work up and continue to update laws, continue to update CISA, allow more robust sharing of information beyond simple indicators of compromise, look at creative ways to put in place the right incentives to increase security. Keep the work up, and I think we'll make a lot more additional progress.
And my time is about to run out, but one of the things after hearing the testimony from Mr. Reed, I was trying to equate how small, and you don't have to answer because my time will run out, how small of businesses are concerned with cybersecurity, and that's the ones that are 4 and 5 and stuff before we get into the level that you're talking about. You know, and maybe at some point in time, as chairman, he might be
Give
able
a
to.
really short answer. Companies of one person can have records of hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kansas, Dr. Marshall, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Mr. Reed spoke of fusion centers. Are the other witnesses familiar with fusion centers as well? Okay. Do your small businesses that when I visited our fusion center in Kansas, terrific facility. It's more of a regional facility, I would describe it. The private sector interaction were several big utilities, as I can recall, maybe a big bank. How are small business access, Ms. Sage? Are you familiar with the small business access to the fusion centers?
It's a challenge because first of all, a lot of these fusion centers are used for briefings, right, at the classified level, et cetera. And so if you don't have those credentials
Right.
to get in, you're not even in the
Right, getting the top secret clearance.
exactly.
And you can't participate with them unless you can't say, here's our problem, without them divulging stuff to you. And anyway, Mr. Reed, you mentioned.
Right. I think that gets to the education. And having spent recently been in your wonderful district and talked to some of your small businesses there, I think there is a huge education gap on how those fusion centers can play a role. And so I think that the questions we have to ask is there something that can be done to give them the credentialing and the input and the entry point? Because as you point out, right now it's primarily critical infrastructure that understands how they fit into this equation. But as we've talked about here, literally hundreds of thousands of small companies have the information that could compromise critical infrastructure if we're not careful. So yes, we need to do a better job with getting access to those fusion centers.
Okay. Yeah. My next question centers around. It seems like we're always on defense when it comes to this, rather than going on offense. It's almost like it's they're trying to rob the bank. Someone's trying to rob the bank 10 times a day, 20 times a day, and it seems like we've accepted that's okay. And we don't go after those people hard enough. We're not going on the offense with them. We're not releasing these hunt viruses back at them and trying to be more aggressive. Maybe I'm wrong, but who's out there doing a great job saying, we're not going to take this anymore. We're not going to sit there and just get attacked. I'll sit there and watch 20 or 30 attacks on some of my companies back home in a matter of an hour when I'm there. Anybody have a comment at who's doing a good job going on offense? Mr. Arnold does.
Well, actually, I was going to say that I don't think that the small businesses are actually equipped to do offense at that level. Because they're going to invite a counter attack by going on the offensive.
So we need to empower them. We need who's trying to say, here's the software to go on the offense. Mr.
So let me take that one on. It depends on how you define offensive activity. We actually have to be careful with overbroad rules that allows unqualified people to hack back, because you never quite know who the attacker is and you can get subsidiary effects. That said, there's a lot of innovative work being done in the cybersecurity sector on machine learning, on analytics, on doing a much better job of understanding threats as they're starting to occur and starting to react early on to 0 days attacks that hadn't been seen before. The science is really moving much beyond the traditional blacklisting antivirus model. So that innovation is occurring in large companies, and you're seeing a lot of small players doing a lot of innovating. You've seen a massive increase in the amount of venture capital money flowing to the cybersecurity sector, billions of dollars, in fact. So I think the trend lines overall are pretty good, but we still have some rough spots.
Okay, I need to move on to the next question. My opinion is most companies are afraid to report. They're afraid if they report, it shows a weakness. Their customers might find out how vulnerable they are. How do we overcome that?
We need to help them plan ahead for the eventuality of that happening. Small businesses don't even do the normal tabletop exercises that larger organizations do, that generally put larger organizations in a better spot to respond to an adverse event, even just from a marketing and PR standpoint. So helping educate small businesses on how to do that would be very helpful.
And I think it ties back to your previous question, which is where do you find the consultants and others in the space that can help you build ahead? I think you work through platforms that exist, larger platforms, but also you look at some of the consultancies that exist out there and find ways to do, as you said, tabletopping, but remembering always that the primary goal of the business. So I think it's about informing the IT professionals that set up that web presence or that customer store or your database and saying to them, how are we prepared? And I think that goes to Ms. Sage's point, which is we've got to change the incentive structure.
Yeah, I agree with both gentlemen, and I would just like to add, Dr. Marshall, that the cybersecurity framework that was developed by NIST and industry, I think really provides a good model to help both large and small, because it addresses that specific area of how do we respond to and recover from some of these, cyber events.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman yields back. Those are some excellent questions, really, and the answers were good, too. Thank you. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's the ranking member of Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all very much for your testimony. I've learned a lot just listening. Let me ask Mr. Gann this question. Why should it be a priority for the federal government to pay attention to the vulnerabilities that small businesses face against cyber crimes?
Well, it's a great question. Indeed, we've gotten so many great questions. It's been really a very fine hearing. Small businesses, it's worth remembering, oftentimes can be part of the most innovative pieces of the economy. Small businesses, whether in tech, biotech, machining, any number of areas, are oftentimes there because their founders left big companies because they wanted to do something new that maybe a large organization didn't allow them to innovate on. So protecting those assets, those pieces of intellectual property that are really the seed corn of the future of our economy, that's absolutely essential. That is, I think, number one. Beyond that, the issue of PII that so many small businesses own today, that's number two. But small business is absolutely a piece of the challenge that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Mr. Arnold, how can small business development centers help with the collection and the dissemination of cybersecurity information?
Because essentially, well, let's talk about first the collection thereof. When events happen, some of them have grave economic impact. Some of them are maybe not have horrible economic impact, but they have some technical issues and indicators that all need to get reported. And so the SBDC has kind of become a triaging place, so the small business can say, "Hey, I've had this kind of attack. Who do I need to report this to?" And they can give a list of the agencies that are best suited to gather that data. And then likewise on the backside of disseminating the information back out, as Ms. Sage has pointed out a couple of different times, each small business is very unique in its needs. And there are a lot of different programs out there, and there is a need for that diversity. But we also need to have a phone book, if you will, a directory of, okay, well, these are the information programs that are out there. These are the educational pieces that are out there. And the SBDCs could connect the small businesses to those.
Thank you. And anybody wants to answer this question, based on your experience as a small business working with other small businesses, why is it that most small firms don't understand the full scope of their risk to cyber threats? And do you believe we need more outreach, more education? If anybody can respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
So, having been a founder of a couple of small businesses, what makes you motivated to build a small business is to solve a problem, whether it's to sell food on the street corner or to build the next great social media application. Your focus is on delivering a product and solving a problem as you see it. And that's what burns inside of you. That's what takes the risk. That's what gets you to borrow money from your mom's house to put it out there. And so the problem starts with, if cybersecurity isn't something that you're in the business of, and it isn't the problem you're trying to solve, you're pouring every amount of your heart and soul into solving that specific problem. So I think that what we have to do is, early on, the education effort has to be, if you want to see your dream realized, then you need to make sure that you're taking care of business at the very beginning before you see your dream dashed because you lost that information. So I think it's about structuring the question that you asked, and I think it's a vital question. And you need to turn it back on that small business and ask them, I'm here to help you get your dream, but what are you doing to make sure it can live for the long term, not just for the short?
Okay. Does anybody want to respond quickly to that?
I'd like to add, too, that small businesses, well, we frame cybersecurity as an IT problem. It needs to be reframed as a business problem, one that the business owners have to address, and I think that's critical.
Ms. Sage?
I just want to say amen. But I also think that to the points that have been made earlier, if cybersecurity is not going to help us ultimately accomplish our business goal, it will go the way of every other issue or concern that small businesses have to deal with, which is we don't deal with them until we have to. So to the extent that we can help, as you rightly pointed out, educate business owners, and to Mr. Arnold's point that this is not just a technology problem, educate business owners that it's the same like if you don't have an EIN number for doing business, you can't do business. It doesn't matter what kind of service you want to provide. There's certain things you just have to have in place. And I think if we can get our small business community to understand that this is one of those kinds of things, I think we'll be in a much better place.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time.
Thank you very much, gentlelady's time has expired. We want to thank the panel here for your very insightful information that you've given us here today. I think you answered the questions very, very well, and cybersecurity is clearly one of the one of the greatest issues a lot of small businesses face today. They know it's important, but they're not quite sure exactly what to do about it, and this committee wants to work to help them to the extent that we can. So thank you for helping us to help them. We appreciate it greatly. I would ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record without objection. So ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure making your acquaintance.
Thank you.
Great job.
Great job.